Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for coming to our December 10th agenda meeting. We're going to set the agenda for our next board meeting, which is December the 17th. And so we're going to look at all the items. I do want to take a point of personal privilege. There's a couple of cowboys in the audience. One of them is a former city board member from Springdale, Arkansas, Ray Dotson. He also runs the carriages down in the old Fort Worth stockyards, if you've ever been there. Then the other one is a former senator, former representative, largest red pole cattle breeder in the United States of America, and possibly the largest cattle farmer in the city of Little Rock. It's hard to tell because he moves them from one city to another, so it's kind of hard to tell. His name is Phil Wyrick. Oh, he says the only cattle producer. But they're going to Las Vegas tomorrow. They're going to turn Las Vegas into Cowboy Town. They do this every year and come back and fuss about how much it costs to be there. So we'll see. We'll see how that works. Okay, now let's get started. It looks like we have a modification, M1. Okay, did you do your button? Yeah. Okay, Director Adcock.
Mr. Moore, I would like to have a presentation on this. Here we are 2 weeks before the end of the year, and we're looking at the budget again to make changes. I'd like to know all about these, please.
Sure. Obviously, Sarah's prepared to do a presentation, but this is very typical of, this is a budget adjustment. There's been some years we've done up to 3 or 4 of them. This would be the first one after the board adopted the budget or amended the budget in the fall or in the summer. So yeah, we'll be prepared to go through each of the items, and a lot of it has to do with the increase in our revenue based on internet sales, and then just some other adjustments. But this is a regular course of action.
I also would like to pay particular attention to the golf course on here, because I thought when we did the amendments that all of our problems with golf courses was taken care of, and I see that we're still having golf course problems.
Sure. I think after we add it, then we'll go through the presentations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do I have a motion to add it to
Director,
our agenda? Yes, sir.
Vice Mayor.
Brenda, is that what you said?
Well, I was calling you Mayor, and then I went to Director, and then I finally remembered Vice Mayor. And,
Yes, Mr. Carpenter.
You don't have it before you today, but in September, we did a modification on the solid waste rates. I thought we had covered all, and I got a notice today that we need to do an amendment to one more section that deals with the tipping rates, and we need to add that for Tuesday, and I'll have the ordinance out Friday. It
Okay.
changes section 28-25 of the code just to put in the new tipping rates for the landfill.
Okay. What are the wishes of the board? Do we want to add those two modifications to the agenda? And then, okay. Okay, I have a motion.
Not until we hear the information I've requested on M1, please.
Okay. Do you want to hear it now? Okay. Mr. Moore, is it okay if we have Ms. Lanahan go over the modifications at this point? Okay. First of all, Sarah Lanahan, who is our Chief Financial Officer. I think the mayor calls you something else, but anyway, she's the money keeper.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, members of the board. If you'll pull up the board communication, Allie will go through it line item by line item. First of all, we do have adjustments to the general fund, the street fund, the fleet fund, and the parking garage fund included in the amendment. At first, the fiscal impact table is a summary of all the individual line items that I'll go through, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the table, except to say that the total for the general fund at the bottom of the first page, we're going to increase our revenues by $3.3 million. We have a corresponding increase to expense of $3.3 million for a zero impact of this budget amendment. As you turn the page, you'll see that in the street fund, we're going to be increasing revenues by $844,900. We're going to reduce anticipated expenses by $533,000 for a net increase to fund balance of $1,377,900. In the fleet fund, we're going to decrease anticipated revenues by $1,877,000. We're going to decrease expenses by $1,203,000 for a net decrease of $673,750. And in the parking garage fund, we're going to increase projected revenues by $306,400. The total for all funds will be a net increase to revenue of $2.5 million, a net increase to expense of $1,570,000 for a net increase to total city fund balance of $1 million, $1,010,550. So now I'll go through each of the individual adjustments. We'll start with the general fund. The first, excuse me, is the revenue adjustment. We're going to, if we'll go to the top of the next page, it gives you the detail. Property tax revenues we anticipate will be $187,622 above our amended budget. I do want to say that when we did the June 4th budget amendment, the primary purpose of that amendment was to realign kind of our expenditures with our ongoing revenues. The only revenue adjustment that we made, other than that associated with repurposing 2 golf courses, was a slight increase in our sales taxes based on the state's projection for internet sales for half a year. Our actual sales tax results have been ahead of budget throughout the year. I'll be doing the third quarter financial report at the end of tonight. But what this sales tax adjustment reflects is our actual revenues that we've received for sales that include the month of September. We have not received anything for October through December yet. It does exclude the unusual adjustment that we had in April that included the electric goods wholesalers amount that showed 18.5% growth. There's still the potential that we'll see a rebate on that that will offset that revenue, and that could come anytime between now and next May. But so this sales tax adjusts to our actual experience through September, and then it projects 3.5% for the remainder of the year. Well, that's higher than what we've experienced previously. When I do my financial report later this evening, you'll see that since the Act 822 has gone into effect, our revenues have increased, and this is actually a little conservative to be sure that we're not overestimating. Our licenses and permits will be decreasing $413,900. This is primarily associated with the permits. In 2018, we had some very large permits pulled for the Southwest High School and Bank Ozark. We had included the annual projections when we were looking at our 2019 budget forecast, and we overestimated those permits, so we're pulling that down. Franchise fee revenues. We have received updated estimates from Energy and from CenterPoint, and that is what is reflected here. You'll see more detail on that when I give my financial presentation in a few minutes. But that total for all franchise fees will be an increase of $232,500. Our intergovernmental revenues are the pension turnback funds that we receive annually from the state in July. This is the portion of the intergovernmental revenues that goes to the general fund that is above budget. This is intended to help offset 40% of the police and fire lot fee payments. The other portion that's dedicated to the closed pension plans will be in the following adjustment, and I'll talk about that in a minute. On charges for services, you all will recall that we had historical flooding in the spring of this year. So some of these adjustments to our charges for services are directly associated with that flooding. The first one, the parks, the $6,000 reduction is a net of several changes. Some are actual increases, but the decreases are primarily associated with lost revenue due to flooding. The River Market adjustment is a decline in space rental at the River Market. The golf reduction is primarily associated with flooding at Rebsamen and at Hindman. During the first half of the year, during that flooding, those golf courses had to be closed for some repairs. And this is primarily associated with Rebsamen. There was just a slight amount associated with Hindman. The Jim Daly Fitness and Aquatics increase of $50,000 since we made some changes, some improvements at the fitness center, and we changed to the monthly credit card automated memberships. That revenue will be increasing $50,000. The decline in the zoo revenues is associated with the flooding as well, lost revenue during the spring. Police services, we had some vacant positions at the airport and the amount of overtime that's reimbursed is capped, and so we are going to see a decline in that revenue from our original budget of $85,500. On the flip side, fire services are up at the airport, and we're going to see an increase of $170,800 there. The reduction in fines and fees is not associated with ticket revenue for a change. This is actually associated with a reduction primarily in River Market fees for security, ticket takers, and special events, and then also in warrants. And then the increase we've been talking about all year on the contributions from Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau. We retired a loan early this year. There was no prepayment penalty, but this was the net increase to that debt service for the prepayment of the loan. There's a corresponding increase to debt service later in the amendment. So total of all of those is an increase to revenue of $2,674,239. The next adjustment is the pass-through adjustments that's associated with the increased projection for property tax levy and for the intergovernmental turnback funds for the two closed pension plans. So that revenue comes into the city, but it's dedicated 100% to those closed pension plans. So it goes right back out to the closed pension funds as a contribution to the pension plans. So there's a net impact of zero in that amendment or adjustment. The next amendment is associated with personnel costs. So we have some increased costs for fire overtime. We have some increased vacation sick leave payouts for retiring employees. And we had some changes in our actuarially determined contributions for other post-employment benefits and for the closed non-uniform defined benefit plan. So the first one, the overtime, fire overtime is actually quite a bit more than this over budget, but it's offset by savings in other expenditure categories, primarily fuel. Our fuel cost is lower than what was anticipated. They had 13 vacancies, I think, during the year. And that drove up some of the overtime cost. Our vacation sick leave payouts, we did have some early retirements when we had the reduction in force. And so we've experienced some increased vacation sick leave payouts. We've also had some just more retirements than anticipated. And so we have exhausted our vacation sick payout accrual through the end of September. This takes us through the last quarter of the year. Our other post-employment benefit contribution, this is an actuarially determined contribution. This is primarily associated with health care cost for retiring police and fire that have not yet reached Social Security age. And so they are allowed to participate in the city's health insurance plan, and much like pension, this is something that you have to fund and make contributions to. And our increase in the OPEB contribution with the new GASB standard is $606,000. On the next line, though, we had a reduction to our non-uniform pension contribution, and this is for the closed non-uniform plan. It was closed in the 80s. It's not our new 2014 defined benefit. This is the one that has an actuarial contribution. It has a fixed number of members that is declining, and that contribution is going down $431,000. So the net change associated with those personnel cost changes $1,068,000. And there are no changes in the count of personnel associated with those changes. Those are just as described. As we move into the operating expense adjustments, that's our next adjustment. So we've had an increase in civil service hearings, and the board approved earlier this year an adjustment to the contract with Friday Elridge and Clark for providing those services, and this reflects that increase to the budget. In our general administration division, we have 311 operations, and we have the performance and innovation division. Both of those divisions have salary budgets and personnel budgets, but they did not have an operating expense budget. So this adds some operating expenses for these departments. The $119,000 in performance and innovation is primarily associated with the software maintenance for the Socrata site that provides the open data portal for citizens. In the Parks Department, we have an increase of $25,000 associated with the cost of operating the West Central radio station. This was funded by a special project in a prior year. I think through the Children, Youth, and Family allocation that was discontinued, and so it's had to be picked up by Parks, and they did not have that in their budget. The additional golf, again, associated with the flood. There were additional land maintenance repairs. There was a water pump that provides water for Rebsamen that was, taken out of service during the flood. So this also includes the increased water requirements during that time. There was also, with the golf operations at War Memorial and Heineman, there were some Toro motor engine replacements, some heavy repairs. We also had some, when we closed out our golf cart lease and went with a new golf cart provider, we received a bill for 3 years' worth of property taxes on the previous golf cart lease that we were not expecting. So that includes that allocation and those additional repairs. So that $80,000 is for our 3 legacy, Rebsamen, Heineman, and War Memorial golf cart lease, and the equipment repairs. At the Jim Daly Fitness Center, the board and executive management asked that the fitness center open the outdoor pool for the summer, and when we had prepared the 2019 budget originally, it was not anticipated that that pool would be operated throughout the summer, so the increased contract cost and part-time cost was about $24,000. So the total increase to operating expenses is $324,735. The next adjustment is the flip side of the LRCVB contribution, the debt service expense. Now, the reason that this doesn't exactly match the revenue side is because of the lost revenue at the River Market and some of the additional expenses. Those are split with the city when that the LRCVB makes up part of that loss, so that revenue included a contribution to cover part of that loss. This debt service is just the expense of the debt service. Next, we had transfers in. The next adjustment is associated with both transfers in and transfers out. So the transfers in piece of this, we have an investment for our closed pension plans that we got a return of capital on that investment. Since those plans are now merged with LOPFI, that those funds came into the city through a transfer in, and then they'll be distributed to LOPFI. But the city is the owner of the investment. So that was $197,644 that happened in August. Our transfers out, we had a legal judgment that is on appeal, and the court has asked us to set aside these funds pending the appeal, which is not anticipated to occur until next year. So if we're successful in our appeal, this money will come back into the general fund, but temporarily we're holding it in a special project, and so we've got to transfer out for that. The right below that, we've been accumulating some of our flood-related expenses in a special project 25% of that will be matched by the city, and then FEMA will reimburse the remaining 75%. So this 47,468 will fund our 25% match on some of the park-related flood expenses that FEMA has approved. On the transfer out, then, we also have an allocation of $50,000 for repairs of the Jim Daly parking lot. This will improve ADA accessibility, and it is offset by that increase in revenue that we've experienced at the fitness center. So the net impact of the adjustments to transfers is a reduction of $143,474 to fund balance, or a net increase in transfers. On the next page, this is the adjustment that you normally see each year. We budget an amount for vacancy savings, and we budget an amount for vacation and sick payouts. This just shows that allocation by department. It includes through the October 5th payroll, and which time we had achieved our vacancy savings requirement for the year. And we were at $1,243,000 of our $1,250,000 vacation sick payout, which is why we're adding $425,000 to the allocation as part of this amendment. And that's reflected over in the additional allocation column towards the far right. But this is just that net allocation to show you how that's happened. That's consistent with prior years. On the next page, we start with our street fund adjustments. So, Allie, if you'll go to the next page. So on the street fund, when we were talking about our 2020 adopted budget, we mentioned that we had not accurately estimated our state gas turnback. We had underestimated it. Our property taxes, we have slightly overstated, about $60,000. The state gas turnback, we anticipate that will be $754,900 more than what we had in the original budget. We've already received most of that. And then our investment income is up. $150,000 is the anticipated amount for the entire year due to the higher fund balances in the street fund. So the total revenue adjustment is a net increase of $844,900. We're also adjusting our street fund personnel cost. Our vacancy savings that we've already achieved through October were $558,000 more than the original allocation, so this just reflects that. And then we've also experienced an increase in our workers' compensation cost, and so that's partially offset by that increase, which is a net decrease to the street fund expenses of $443,000. Then on the operating side, there were some contract decreases. We had built into the budget and had carried forward $150,000 in our repair and maintenance contract in the street and drainage department, and $300,000 in civil engineering. The civil engineering piece was associated with the original issuance of the bonds for some contract engineers that we are not utilizing in the current year, and so there was savings there that we needed to reduce that expenditure budget. And then our traffic engineering electricity expense is down $85,000, so we reduced that expense. So this is just to more accurately reflect our street fund, bring it in line with the actual expenditures. So the decrease to the street fund operating expenses was $535,000. And then we've had some transfers out to the street fund special projects from street fund revenue. One was the Bentley Court pavement project, $130,000. Fire Station 24's traffic signal, and then University Avenue signals. These are all projects that have been approved previously by the board, but we had not put them in the original budget. We weren't aware of them when we originally did the budget, and these are transfers just again from street fund to street fund special projects to kind of set that money aside. Now into the fleet fund adjustments. So on the fleet fund, our fuel costs have been quite a bit below what was originally anticipated in the 2019 budget. We're reducing that anticipated revenue, $845,000. The compressed natural gas has gone down $325,000. with the fleet replacement that we've been doing, the recurring fleet replacement has reduced some of the need for major parts and repairs, so that's going down $431,000. Our insurance repairs has gone down $93,000, and then sublet billings for major system replacements, like engine replacements and things that we don't do in-house, that is also down $183,000. So we're anticipating a reduction of $1,877,000 in our fleet fund revenues. We see a reduction in our expenses as well. I have not reduced the fleet fuel budget quite as much as the revenue piece. The revenue comes when the fuel is actually used by departments. That cost is passed on then to the individual departments that are utilizing the fuel. So the fleet fund is an internal service fund. So as our police department uses fuel for police vehicles, the fleet department bills the police department for the fuel. And that happens throughout the city. But they also will purchase fuel towards the end of the year for supply, ongoing. So I have not reduced the fuel budget in the same amount as the revenue for the current year, anticipating that this purchase may be for fuel that will be used next year. We've got a reduction in the CNG fuel, the parts, and the contracted services to go along with the reductions in revenue. And then our parking garage fund, you all will recall that the board made some changes to the street cut ordinance that required some penalties if street cuts weren't done in a timely manner or in a timely way. And we have seen quite an increase associated with the street fund, or with the street cut revenue, which is dedicated to our parking garage debt service. So that has increased the revenue in the parking garage fund by $396,400. Our parking in the parking deck, the daily parking at the River Market garage is down. There's a lot of parking on street and around there that their monthly parking rates are up, which or our meeting budget. But this is just the daily parking piece, and that has declined some, but it's more than offset by the increase in the street cut revenues, So the net increase to the parking garage revenues is $306,400. So again, on the first page where you had the table, the first 2 pages, that's the summary. As you go through each of those lines, there was an amount up here. So the grand total again to the general fund, those are balanced, so there's no change to the anticipated net income that we had with our June 4th amendment. But then as you go on to the street fund, the net impact is an increase to fund balance of $1,377,900. To our fleet fund, it's a decrease of $673,750. And to our parking garage funds, an increase of $306,400 for a grand total of $1,010,550 increase in fund balance for the city.
Thank you, Ms. Linehan. Director Edcott, do you still
Yes.
have questions?
Yeah, I've got 2.
Okay.
Sarah, if you took all of this extra income coming in, if we had not done those adjustments back in the summer, if we had not panicked and done those, how would we have finished this year?
Well, again, you'll remember your current budget for 2019, your original adopted budget, was a balanced budget. So we would have anticipated you ending the year with a balanced budget. And with these adjustments, they're balanced as well. The problem was that some of those revenues that were in the 2019 budget were transfers in to close old special projects, or there were temporary reductions like the funding for the Arts Center that was paid out of the hotel tax proceeds and things like that. Those things were not sustainable and were not available to pay current salaries that had been approved for police and fire. Their raises are ongoing, but the revenues were not. So we would have been facing a deficit of at least $5 million to start the 2020 budget.
But the budget that we've approved for 2020 is actually more than the 2019 budget, correct?
Very slightly in the general fund.
But it
very
was more.
slightly. Yes.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, I think Director Hines offered a motion Well, we said that all money left over after this year, we would place it into our rainy day fund.
Well, and due to that budget amendment, June 4th, that was adopted, it was a half-year reduction. So right now, the amended budget, including this one, projects net income of 2 million, I believe it's 2,274,000. I'll have that on my, I have that in my notes. But anyway, the budget amendment does require that goes into that reserve. And that this
looks
does
to me,
not
some of
change
these
that.
things, I can understand the adjustments on these. But it looks like that somebody went around and just said, okay, now what can we spend this money on? Let's find things to spend this money on so that we don't carry over a larger amount. And I'm sorry, but that's just kind of my personal opinion in looking at this today.
Well, I will tell you that I've been accumulating this list, as the year has gone on, and I had about 15,000 left that I added to fire overtime.
Well, if these things hadn't had all these increases and everything, what was you going to do? You said you've accumulated all this list, and it looks to me like you would have found the money someplace because evidently we spent this money along the year.
Well, I will. If we had not seen the increases that we've seen in sales tax, we would have had to go into our fund balance and utilized our contingency allocation. We have that $1 million contingency allocation from our original budget. We have not touched that. So that will still be available for our restricted reserve too. Part of the issue, you'll recall, our 2018 year ended with a loss in our general fund and special projects of almost $7 million. And so the desire was to try to replenish some of that. And so with the budget amendment June 4th and the contingency, we will be doing that. And that's also something that we can utilize as we're looking towards our healthcare options next year.
Well, I'm interested to see how much we finish the year with this year, so
Thank
that
you,
we'll have
Director
more
Adcock.
going into that fund.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it was Director Webb that made that motion.
Yes.
Oh, instead of Director Hines.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it was her.
Thank you, Director Webb.
Yeah. Doris and Lance, did y'all have questions? And did you just get tired? Okay. All right. So we've had questions and answers from this M1 ordinance, and we have a motion and a second to move it to the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Let's move into the agenda items, and that I probably need a motion for the solid waste ordinance as well that we haven't seen yet.
I'd like to leave it separate until we see it.
But we need to add it to the agenda.
I move that we add to the agenda, but keep it separate.
Okay. Okay, I got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Okay, it'll be separate. All right, looking at our agenda, we have one resolution on page 1. Are there any questions on 1 through 5? Okay, hearing no questions. What about 6 through 9? You need to,
Wash, do we not still have that?
Sure, we do. Let me ask Mr. Hinton, our fleet director, to come forward.
is that item 7?
Mr. Hinton, we did have out the street department, out J.E. Davis, a car wash. Do we still not have that car wash to do our own vehicles?
Yes, ma'am. We have that car. We have actually 2 car washes over there. This is for lightweight sedans and stuff that's traveling out around the city, police cars, public works, small trucks. So when they are out in the community and they get dirty or something, they can stop and wash the vehicle.
For $140,000?
We wash a lot of vehicles. We have 1,000 vehicles, and about 500 of them utilize that car wash.
Which company is it and how many car washes do they have throughout the city?
They have one car wash. It's Wiggy Wash on John Barrow. And
Okay, then explain to me, if they have one car wash on John Barrow, and we're doing this so that our cars do not have to go all the way out to J.E. Davis, which is in southwest Little Rock, how is this a savings? Now, I could see if they had 5 or 6 car washes all over town, but driving all the way out to John Barrow Road, that should be no different than driving out to southwest Little Rock to J.E. Davis.
it is an automatic car wash where they actually go through it. Our car wash out at J.E. Davis is a manual car wash. You literally have to get out and wash the vehicle yourself.
How many years would it take for us to pay for a car wash by putting a car wash that they don't have to get out and do manually at J.E. Davis?
That's a good question. I'd have to get that information together.
I'd like to know how many years we would pay for our own car wash instead of $140,000 a year to wash cars.
Yes, ma'am. That's a good
Thank
question.
you.
Thank you,
Like that
Director
left
Adcock.
separate.
And we need to hold that separate. Okay. Going to item 10 resolution, is there a question on that? Okay. We have separate items, 11 through 12. Are there any questions?
I was looking at something else.
Director Wright?
Number 2, that says Ward 6. Mr. Moore, Boulevard, I don't recall a Boulevard Street in Ward 6, and it says it intersects with Charles Bussey. That's not Ward 6. So can you have that corrected in the record, please? And also, too, I'd like a report on number 4, a presentation on 4. This surface transportation grant, what is that? And what will it involve?
This is a grant that our Public Works Department has been working through with the state and Metro Plan. So, Mr. Honeywell.
Director Wright, the STIP or Surface Transportation Program is a federal grant program that's operated through the Arkansas Department of Transportation and Metro Plan. This particular grant application is through Metro Plan's portion of that funding. And what it is, it's what we plan on applying for is Bowman Road from Canis south to Cherry Laurel. It's a project that we're currently designing right now and acquiring right-of-way for. This funding is something that has to be done next year. And part of that grant application is we need to have a resolution from the Board of Directors supporting us as far as making the application for the grant.
Oh, I understand that aspect. I'm trying to figure out what it's going to look like. Is this to
This is to
take the-
widen Bowman Road
from Canis down
the
to Cherry
intersection at
Laurel?
Canis all the way to Cherry Laurel.
Will that alleviate the stacking that
Yes,
takes
ma'am.
place when you're getting ready to turn left onto Canis?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It will actually widen out that whole intersection on the Bowman Lake will all be widened out.
I think I saw 5 lanes, is that right?
Probably,
way?
yes, if not more.
Okay.
If you include turn lanes,
Yeah.
the number of left turn lanes, if you have dedicated right turn lanes, all that kind of stuff.
So, Mr. Hines was telling me that should alleviate 80% of my traffic issues on Bowman.
It will have a huge impact on any kind of stacking that's occurring there now,
Correct.
coming northbound on
Well,
Bowman.
does that impact the liquor store right there on the corner at all?
Yes, ma'am.
So we will be purchasing that?
We will be negotiating acquisition of property from that
Okay, so
property owner.
it'll be going in that direction, so it won't impact the little shopping center on the opposite side?
Well, they have already dedicated right-of-way that they're required to through the development of that property in the past.
Okay. Well, I'm sure my constituents in that area will be very, very happy. I know I will.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's pretty exciting.
Well, we hope we get this. We have to get this grant, but we're optimistic about it.
Thank you, John. Director Adcock?
Mr. Moore, back to item 7, I'd like to know if that was a bid process and how many companies bidded for it. And I'd also like to know how much is the car wash on the corner of Guyer Springs and the freeway, because that would be a very easy one for people to get off of that's going across town, and it is for sale. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adcock. Director Webb?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I have a question about number 3, reading the board communication. It says we're increasing the amount of money authorized for this because the RDOT determined that we're going to have to move something to accommodate the replacement of the adjacent viaduct. And so my question is, is that something that we just missed early on, or if you could you explain that?
Mr. Honeywell's still here, so, Mr. City Manager, is it all right
Sure,
for
Mr.
Mr. Honeywell to talk to us?
Director Webb, this project is, I think most of y'all are aware, if you're not aware, the Highway Department is currently planning on replacing the bridge that goes over the creek there at Dillard's, the school, that location. That's where we're talking about. Currently, underneath that existing bridge structure, there's a smaller bridge. And we have had an agreement with the Highway Department for many years to replace that bridge prior to them planning to replace the big bridge. We actually had a grant through the Highway Department to replace that bridge. We had designed that replacement. Now that they've come back and said they want to replace the big bridge, that's impacting where we wanted to build the smaller bridge underneath. So what we've done is agreed with the Department of Transportation to use the grant money that we had towards that bridge below, roll it into their overall big bridge project, and they'll replace that bridge for us as part of that big project. We don't have any match funds that we have to do. The only thing we have to do is pay for the engineering, which is what this is. It's a change to the contract with our consulting engineer that was working on that bridge design to modify those plans to, we have to actually relocate where we're going to build the small bridge to accommodate the new bridge where it's going to be placed. So that's what this is a change in their design contract to change the plans so it can all be built as one big project. I'm sorry I rambled on there, but it's sort of difficult to.
I think we got the picture.
Thank you.
So it's something that it was designed to be one thing, but a new project has come along that's a lot bigger that impacted our smaller projects. So now we're combining them into one project, and that requires these changes to be done.
Are you good?
I think we're coming out on the better end of it in the long run.
Sounds
as
like
far
we
as-
are.
That's the main.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Sounds like we are. Thank you, Mr. Honeywell. Okay, we're down to separate items 11 and 12. Are there any questions on that? Seeing no questions, we're ready for Ms. Sarah to come forward with the third quarter financial report. This is Sarah's day to present.
Your paper copies are coming around. Okay, so Allie, let's go ahead. There we are. This is the report through September, the end of our third quarter. Our third quarter revenues were at 80.78% of the original or of the June 4th amended budget. We would expect, if it was just 3/4 of the annual amount, to be at 75%. This compares to 79.57% same period a year ago. On the next slide, we'll see the dollars. We had $163.5 million in revenues. 3/4 of the budget was 151.8 million. Same period a year ago was 157.1 million. So as of the end of September, we were 11.7 million above budget and approximately 6.4 million above the same period a year ago. But a lot of that is attributed to the timing of annual revenues, which we'll see on the next slide. So our personal property taxes, those are primarily, as we talk about all year, about 40% of those are collected in the first half of the year, with the remaining 50% in the second half of the year. September's report includes the accrual for the October revenue. This is these taxes are based on assessments that are made in the previous year. So once they're available to us within 60 days, we're allowed to accrue that revenue. So we're currently at 91.5% of our annual budget. What we'll receive over the next couple of months is typically the excess commissions and some small late payments. These are virtually almost complete. We have about 10% remaining to come in the last quarter of the year. And this is pretty consistent with last year. It's a little bit above that due to the increase in the assessed valuation. Sales tax revenues I'm going to talk about in detail in a minute, so I'll hold on that. Licenses and permits, about 6.9 million of the total annual budget is associated with the annual business licenses, which are due by January 1 of the year. So most of them are collected at the first of the year. Then included is also our mixed drink licenses that happen ratably through the year in our permits. As we discussed a few minutes ago with the budget amendment, our permits are below budget. Our business license revenue and our mixed drink revenue, our business licensors are at 97% of the annual budget. Mixed drink revenue is at 83.5%. It's actually up 8% from a year ago. But the building permits are at 66% of the annual budget, and they're 14% below the same period a year ago. So our proposed amendment includes a reduction in those permits. Our intergovernmental revenues, you'll see that's contributing almost 3.2 million to the variance, but that's because 100% of those revenues are collected in July. So that's the total amount we'll receive for the year. Our charges for services, I talked about in detail during the budget amendment. We're below budget, and a lot of that has to do with some of the flooding that we experienced in the first quarter of the year. Our fines and fees are below budget, $258,955. Part of this is due to the, at the first of the year, revenues collected in January and February for traffic fines that were issued prior to year end get accrued back to the previous year. That will happen again at the end of this year, which will take care of about 178 to 180,000 of that variance. The remaining variance of about 80,000 is associated with those fees that we're making the budget amendment for security in the River Market, ushers, ticket takers for those special events, and the warrant service fees. And so we've got the proposed budget reduction of 100,000 that will accommodate the entire year. In our investment income line, that's over budget primarily due to the fair market value, the reversal of the fair market value adjustment that was done at the first of the year. We anticipate being pretty close in our investment income revenue at year end to our original budget once we make the fair market value adjustment at the end of this year. And then our miscellaneous revenues are $1.3 million above budget, and the majority of that is due to that contribution received from LRCBB at the beginning of the year for the payoff of that short-term note. And that too was reflected in the budget amendment that we just looked at. On the next slide, you see the comparison to the same period a year ago, and this is a better place to really evaluate our revenues. Our sales tax revenues are 3.9 million above the same period a year ago. And again, I'll go to that. I'll go in detail about that in a moment. But a portion of the increase in 2019 is still subject to rebate. And so we don't know how much of that one amount we'll be able to retain. The intergovernmental revenues were 814,000 above last year, we were 700 and some thousand above our budget, and that was reflected in the amendment. And again, about half of that is passed through directly to the closed pension funds. On the utility franchise fees, I'll show you detail on that as we get to more slides. And our miscellaneous is again the reflection of the increase associated with the LRCVB contribution for the debt retirement. So on the next slide, you'll see since Act 822 passed, our revenues began increasing. So the August revenues were for June, or that August 19 line actually is right before the June, July, and or July, August, and September, the last three sets of bars that you see. And beginning July 1 is when Act 822 went into effect with our tax collection on internet sales. And since that time, we've seen that our sales tax has grown 8.49% in July, 6.79% in August, and 5.44% in September. Those revenues are in comparison to the same period a year ago, which is prior to Act 822 taking effect. So when we're looking at forecasting for 2020, we did consider the impact to the first half of the year in comparison to the period before that act took in place. But then things will normalize as we move into the second half of the year and we're compared to, comparing apples and apples again. So we don't want to project that we're going to see ongoing growth at this rate. Year to date, our city sales tax has increased 6.07%. Our share of the county tax has increased 4.4% for a blended increase of 5.18%. And we'll see more of that in the following sales tax slides. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. This is a summarization of those numbers I just gave you. It just shows the blended portion of the city, our share of the county, and the turn back. And so again, in the last quarter, we saw blended growth of 8.49%, 6.79%, and 5.44%. The budget amendment that I just brought forward, we are not including in that the full 14.56% growth we had in June, because we could still see that come back in the form of a rebate that would reduce a future revenue. It could happen this year, it could happen anywhere until May of next year, or we might get to keep it, but we don't know, and the state can't tell us. So our year-to-date results are 5.18% above the prior year, and they're 3.33% above budget. If we exclude the impact of the April revenues received in June, then the annual growth over the previous year would be 3.77%, and we're 1.95% above budget. So what that amendment was to bring us to 3.5% for the year. So again, not including the unusual and trying to be somewhat in line with what we've experienced for the year. In the last 12 months, our growth has been 4.2%. On the next slide, you see the comparison to both budget and to the prior year. So again, 3.33% above our budgeted growth, 5.18% above the prior year. But when you take out that unusual result in June for April sales tax, then our growth above budget is 1.95% or 1.5 million, and compared to the previous year, it's 3.77% or 2.85 million. And again, that was reflected in our budget amendment. On the next slide, you see how this has impacted the 1 cent sales tax. So the 24.7 million has been collected in the operations for police and fire and zoo and park services. The 3/8 cent capital, we've collected 14.8 million that has gone towards those dedicated projects for a total of 39.4 million in the current year. So overall, year-to-date growth is 6.07%. Over the life of the 1 cent tax, we've collected about $379.5 million. On the next slide, you'll see our franchise fees. I want to point out there's a little asterisk by January, and I want to give credit to our treasury manager. While we were working on our budget, and we actually did question our revenues in January, this slide has been updated. Our original amount for January showed $394,000 less in revenue. When we got that result, we did question Energy, and they blamed it on the change in the Tax Cut and Job Act. As we were doing our forecast and looking at the usage for the 2020 revenue, the Treasury manager said that just doesn't make sense. He followed up again, and Energy realized that they actually had made an error. And so they sent us an additional $394,000. So proud of Scott for following up and paying attention. And anyway, Energy has since submitted a revised amended forecast for the year. Our annual budget was right at $14 million. It's now $14,273,500. So it's $273,500 above our original budget. We had, you'll see in the first quarter of the year, that is in comparison to prior to the impact of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Once we saw those 17% reductions associated with the Tax Cut and Job Act impact last year, that went into effect in the second quarter of last year. You'll recall that the commercial customers and industrial customers impact of that ended at the end of December. December last year, residential customers continue to receive that credit through December this year. And then it's just the new rates going forward without the additional credit hitting the bills. So we had anticipated an increase of 12% in our annual revenues. We're slightly ahead of that, and that's what is causing the 273.5 adjustment in the budget. As we look at the next slide, our gas franchise fees. Here again, with CenterPoint, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act didn't take effect until after the first quarter. Their credits expired in February of the current year. And so most of those credits were taken in their heaviest use times, passed back to customers in January and February. From that point forward, the credits have expired, and we've seen an increase in our revenue, except for when we had really low usage. So we are slightly behind. We're $175,000 below our monthly projections from the utility, but with the anticipated revenue for the fourth quarter of the year, they have also raised their annual projection. We had budgeted $3,157,000 for the year. They believe that will be $3,285,000, and we've adjusted that up $128,000. Those two increases in the budget amendment that I just presented are partially offset by some decreases to water and wastewater. People obviously don't water their lawns when you're having flooding and that kind of thing, so we're seeing some reductions to those bills. So on the next slide, we move into our expenditures. We had expended 76.9% of our annual budget. Again, 3/4 would be 75%. Last year, we were right at 75%. From a dollar perspective, we had expended $153.3 million compared to a budget $149.5 million, and compared to $150,635,000 the same period a year ago. So our expenditures were $3.8 million above the budget and approximately $2.7 million above the same period a year ago. And when we look at the next slide, you'll see it by department. So general administration, this is primarily due to the timing of expenditures. $836,000 of this negative variance is due to the timing of our outside agency contributions. We normally make those contributions to the entities, so like Rock Region Metro, the jail, all of those folks, we typically make those contributions on the first day of the month. Well, October 1st was the Tuesday before the first pay run, so we actually made those payments in September. So the timing of doing that accelerated, added $836,000 to the September budget, but that will be in line with budget at year end because we will not go over our annual allocation. Some of the other increases, the OPEB adjustment that we made in the budget, that's included. We made that contribution partially offset by the reduction to the non-uniform pensions, so our personnel cost was $308,000 over budget, a combination of those two things. Then also, you'll recall in our budget amendment, we adjusted the Performance and Innovation Division and the 311 expenses for the software renewal. That contributed $125,000 to the negative variance. And then we have contract expenses that are $131,000 over budget, and that's primarily due to the city had to pay some property taxes for city-owned property that is not in public use. So as we acquire land for sale or we acquire land to do something with and we haven't done it yet, we still have to pay property taxes on the land that is not in public use. And that was that bill was paid in September. On the district court side, the negative variance there is a combination of the deputy public defender payment that we made in January. We make an annual payment up front, and then an additional vacation sick payout in August of $51,000. That was tied to the district judge situation where they transitioned to state employees. And that will be offset by a transfer from the vacation sick accrual. Information technology, there's a favorable variance there of $343,000, and that's just due to the timing of the software contract maintenance. That should be in line with budget at year end. As you go to the next slide, it's the other half of our expenses. So Parks and Recreation, while it's showing negative there, the reduction that we made mid-year, those expenses were all incurred in the first half of the year. They're reduced the second half of the year. Parks will be in line with budget at year end. Golf, $70,000 of this is due to the timing of those first tee contributions for maintenance and operation of the facility that we did at the first half of the year. Again, the budget is annualized, so that has a $70,000 impact, but that will be in line at the end of the year. And then approximately $108,000 of the variance is personnel cost, of which $40,000 will be offset by an additional vacation sick payout adjustment. There was some additional overtime associated with the flooding. And the remaining personnel variance is just due to the timing of the fact that we had 4 golf courses funded and full expenses in the first half of the year, and we've only got half of that moving forward. So those expenses will continue to decrease for the rest of the year in comparison to budget. As we talked about in the amendment, part of the variance here, about $41,500 is associated with the fleet allocations for the major equipment repairs, the property tax on the golf cart lease, and then let's see. Oh, the damage to the pump at Rebsamen and the additional water expenses. So the budget amendment that included the additional $80,000 in expense allocation, coupled with the vacation sick allocation that I mentioned, and then the reduction of expenses, in the second half of the year, this will be in line with the proposed amended budget. On the fitness center, there is they're over budget, and that is associated with opening the part-time pool the first half of the year, and then some contract expenses that they incurred earlier in the year, but they, with the proposed amendment of $24,000, will be in line with budget as well. As we move down to fire is $1,022,000 over budget. $570,000 of that variance is attributed to the timing of contributions to the closed pension fund, which is tied to the receipt of that revenue. So that will be in line with budget at year end. The remaining variance is $451,000, primarily associated with overtime net of other favorable variance and expenses, and we adjusted for that in our amendment as well. The police have a favorable variance of $580,000. The police department, they actually have an $869,000 favorable variance in personnel cost. Part of that is due to the timing of the recruit incentives and the sick leave incentives that happen in the fourth quarter, partially offset by a temporary negative variance in the closed pension plan funding, which again is passed through directly from the revenue, so that will be in line with budget at year end. There's no adjustment required for the police department. In the debt service, we're $1.7 million over budget, and that's due to the timing of the early retirement of that note. And again, we talked about that all year long and in the budget amendment. So that will be, once we make the adjustment for that, along with the offsetting income from LRCBB in the budget, this will also be in line with budget at year end. On the next slide, savings from authorized but unfilled positions. We had a vacancy savings requirement of $5.5 million for the year. We had achieved $5.3 million through September 20th, and after the first payroll in October, we have achieved that annual commitment. So there will not be any additional vacancy savings allocations to departments for the remainder of the year. In the vacation sick payouts, we had initially accrued $1,250,000, and by the end of October, we had by the first payroll of October, we had fully expended that. Part of the increase was associated with some retirements, additional early retirements and things that took place along with the reduction in force. So we've allocated an additional $425,000 in the budget amendment to cover that. In the 117 budgeted positions that were unfilled, 10 of those were police officers with 8 higher level uniform sergeant positions. On the next slide, you'll see that we did start a new recruit class in August 19th, and that brought the unfilled positions down to 117 from 130 the previous month. So that concludes my third quarter financial report.
Okay, are there any questions? Director Adcock?
So are you saying that we have 117 vacancies in the fire department, the police department now?
No. That's in the entire general fund.
Okay.
Included in that are 10 officer positions.
Okay. Do we know what ranks those 10 officer positions are?
Those are officers, and then there are 8 sergeants. 10 officers and
So
8
there's
sergeants.
18.
18 total. Uniform.
Okay.
And that's just revolving. I mean, we were fully staffed, and with retirements, and it's just, we stay about one recruit class. As soon as we get it filled with a recruit class, then hopefully our August class will graduate. And
Director Fortson?
I am not sure. They started with, I think they're down a few. I'm not sure. They started, I think they've lost 5 or 6, and I think they started with maybe, I don't know. Do you remember?
Yeah, they've lost about 5. They've lost about 5, and we'll get that current number.
I'm sorry, I don't have that on the top of my head.
Director Fortson?
Sarah, in the sales tax area, you pointed out the April-June aberration with the high numbers, and then again, I know she had a pretty healthy July. You made 2 or 3 references to rebates, and that being an unknown. Could you elaborate on that?
Okay, so local, when you go to the store and you pay your sales tax, you pay your sales tax on the entire purchase price. Businesses, governmental entities, nonprofits have the ability to claim a rebate on any local tax paid on an amount in excess of $2,500 on a single invoice. So this is one of the things that really stunts local sales tax growth in comparison to state sales tax growth. So we aren't allowed to know what might, on the following month's sales tax return, they can claim a rebate, but they have up to an entire year to claim a rebate on those purchases. So we saw that anomaly in June's receipt for April revenues in an area that typically had not been a high revenue producer for us, electric goods wholesalers. So that could have been the result of an audit that was a self-initiated amendment by a company that we would maybe be able to retain. But it could also be that, Energy was replacing all the meters throughout the city, or there were, there are other things going on. So if they had done that purchasing on single invoices, there could be a rebate coming, and we don't have any information on that.
And that rebate will be processed at the state level, and then
They
ultimately get
file
down
the
to you.
rebate with the state, and then it just comes out of our receipts. And we don't, that's why it's so difficult to project what is ongoing revenue versus one-time adjustments. The only thing that, we do see rebates in a separate column, but because there's a year to claim those rebates, you don't know what period they're related to. And then on the audit side of things, if the state initiates an audit and they go out and audit a business and they say, oh, you're really in Little Rock, you're not in Bryant, and they make that adjustment, then that shows up in an audit column. But if the business itself files an amended return, it just shows up with the regular receipts, and we don't have any idea that they're reporting revenues for the past 3 years as opposed to a single month.
But this shows up in the regular receipts that you're looking at.
Right.
Okay.
So that is part of the standard operating procedure, which we have to deal with. But if you discount that month and look forward for the balance of the year, we've had increases each month. Do you have any kind of feel for how much of that can be attributed to Act 822 or internet sales?
We thought we would be able to tell because for a while they were reporting that in a single category as like catalog sales, but now the state is putting that in the category it belongs in. So if it's retail, it goes in the retail. If it's all only divided by the NAICS code, and so we have no idea what percentage is internet versus regular local.
So before you can really do some educated budgeting, you'll have to have the cycle go on through a full year.
We'll have to see it through a year. So the fact that we've had 3 steady increases, we feel like that Act 822 definitely has something to do with that since it started July, and we've seen it in July, August, and September. But as I said, I'm comfortable that there's a bump maybe for the first half of the year when we're in comparison to a period before that act took place. But I think that this will kind of normalize in comparison to this year when we get to the second half of the year.
Well, and if our uneducated assumptions are correct, the November-December period should produce a pretty good increase for you when that's ultimately reported.
We look forward to that.
Yes, we're hoping for that.
Thank you, Director Fortson. Ms. Sarah, thank you so much
Thank you.
for the information. I don't see any more questions. The last item on our agenda for next week is a resolution for appointments. We don't have our appointment books, but it's my understanding we should get them maybe by special delivery Wednesday or Thursday. So, Director Campuris?
A quick question, and I'm sorry Charles left. I saw the announcement about our education czar, and I am a little bit confused about what they're doing. I saw the mayor's video, and he talked about a number of programs that they were going to do, but my understanding was that it was going to go through the Children, Youth, and Family Commission to decide what we're going to do. And so I would appreciate if we could get a written document explaining the job, the responsibilities, what they can do, and if in fact everything is going through Children, Youth, and Family.
Okay. Mr. Moore, did you take those details, and can you make that happen for us? Okay, thank you. Director Hines, you're next. Oh, you're not green yet. Okay. Okay, now you are.
Bruce or Tom, I think we just need some clarity on, is that chief education officer being paid out of general administrative dollars, or is he being paid out of CYF funds that are being allocated for the community schools project?
I can answer that. As part of the children, youth, and families, the budget of approximately $500,000 that, or I think we set up to a minimum of 10%. Out of that allocation of dollars, well, it was a minimum of 10%. That's what the board adopted, or I say adopted. That's what was presented. But actually, we did adopt it because I think, Director Pierce, you asked for a percentage. So in the budget, in the document that was presented, I believe we did add that language that said a minimum of 10%. So that was talked about last week. So it is anticipated that a portion of the education, chief education officer's salary will be paid out of that allocation of the $500,000.
Okay.
Well, then that brings to the next question. If it's $50,000, does that not have to be approved by Children, Youth, and Families and come back to this board for ratification? Typically, when we talk about staffing for children, youth, and families, that's just included as part of the overall allocation. And the CYF obviously want their buy-in. They're going to be obviously part of the discussion and decision making. But I don't think that hiring a staff person is necessarily something that the CYA would have to approve, because again, it's a part-time position at this point. Super. Tom, could you provide for me or even Bruce, our city policy where it comes to part-time employees and the discretion up to what level we have, where that city policy is? I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Hines. Director Adcock?
Mr. Moore, also along those same lines, I have been told that there is an MOU signed by the mayor and Mr. Barth, and I would like to have the board see a copy of that MOU. And is there any other employees?
An MOU between the
Dr.
mayor.
Barth
Oh,
and
okay.
the city of Little Rock. I would like to see who's paying the other portion of his pay. And is there any other city employee, part-time or full-time, that's pay is coming from somebody other than the city of Little Rock?
I believe so, and I'll get those details. For instance, I believe at the zoo Foundation supplements the marketing staff or something like that, but we can get those details to you.
I think that they also may pay a portion of the director of the zoo's salary.
I couldn't
would
remember
like
if it
to-
was both of theirs or the director, but
I'd like to see the MOU for that also. We have people that outside the city has input into what they do and who they answer to.
Thank you, Director Adcock.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of our agenda. I see the fire chief in the audience. Was he going to talk to us about the burn bans?
yeah, I
or-
think he visited with Director Adcock, and if we need some additional, or I thought he did, but if we weren't planning to do it tonight, but we can have that discussion soon.
But it was my understanding that they had visited, but,
Okay, well, he's been patiently sitting there, so, hey, Chief. Fire Station 24 going to open up in January?
That's what the plan is.
Okay, great, thank you. It's a beautiful building. Director Hendricks?
Yes, thank you. I was really concerned about some of the questions that has been asked of Mr. Moore, and I was curious as to whether the attorney should have a say-so in some of this also. So, Tom, am I in error? Some of the things like the MOU, all those questions that have been asked of Bruce? I'm talking to you, Tom.
Director Hendricks, I haven't seen an MOU, so I don't know if there is one. And in terms of the question that was asked about
MOUs I'm concerned about. Salaries.
well, the salary thing,
Well, just anything that has been asked of Bruce, if you can play a role, if that's your job, please do so. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Director Hendricks. Director Wright?
Mr. Moore, we had some citizens here that live at Big Country Chateau, and they are still saying that some people are without hot water, heat, and gas. And I'd like a report on exactly what's going on, where we are, and what are our next steps to get those people utilities.
I know Mr. Carpenter can give an update from a legal standpoint because they are in environmental court, but Mr. Howard and Mr. Collins just met with them, and I don't know if, Kevin, you want to give an update on that meeting status? And as he's coming, we have 24 current recruits in the academy.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Vice Mayor, Board of Directors, Director Wright, we did meet with those citizens, and we are going to meet with them again. We do have code enforcement officers that will be going over tomorrow because they did have some other issues besides the gas.
Bed bugs,
And
roaches.
so they had some questions. So we're going to get some code officers over tomorrow and meet with them. And we did talk to Director Collins about the issues that they were having with the gas. So he gave them an update on the units that did not have gas, and they told us it was 2 buildings that did not have gas to them.
Who told you that?
Director Collins, Jamie Collins.
Okay.
Yeah.
They said also they had mold.
Yes,
Now, it's
we did
my
talk to
understanding that we have a subcontractor that we can use to test for mold.
Yes.
Can that contract be utilized in this instance?
Yes, we did do an RFQ several months ago, and we do have a company that's on board, and that's the reason why we're going to send some code officers over tomorrow so they can inspect, and then they'll get back to us.
Okay, so then you will issue a work order to the vendor,
Yes.
and
Yes,
they
ma'am.
will check to see if there is actually mold.
Yes, once we go over inspect and we see it, we'll get the company out to check it out.
So, Mr. Carpenter, what's the status in court then?
Director Wright, I don't know. This came up right before the meeting. I wasn't able to get a hold of the attorney that's handling that, but I will get that and get that to you.
Okay, I'd just like to know where we stand. This has been going on quite a while, and it was my understanding that these people were cooperating, and then the next thing I know, the city had to take them to court because they failed to follow through on what they said they were going to do. So I'd like to know where we are and what leverage do we have to get them to comply.
Thank you, Director Wright. I hope you'll share that with the rest of the board. I see things on TV frequently about the apartment complex and people in distress, so I hope you'll share it with all of us so we'll have an understanding. I know it's in Director Wright's area, but it's right across the street from me, so thank you, Director Wright.
And one of the things I do want to point out is, and we have this company in court, they're new owners, and so they're giving reports monthly, and the last report I got was that there was only one building that didn't have gas, and they were close to getting that. So it with this group, it sort of evolves every day, and it's cold, and so we need to be hopefully either getting them back in court or seeing some progress.
Mr. Carpenter, is there any way that we can put some stipulations on these multifamily developments once they start changing hands like this to multiple owners as far as the condition is there an inspection that we do to make sure that it's up to code before once it begins to change ownership or something?
Director Adcock, Director Wright, I'm sorry. I was looking across the way. Yes, we can do inspections before the ownership of a rental property occurs. As I understand this situation, the lines sort of went bad after they took over. It wasn't a part of the taking over, because one of the obligations of the purchaser is to use due diligence to see what the situation is, and if you check the gas and they've got it, I don't know if they all go down and look at the pipes, but my understanding is that the gas lines, was it they collapsed or they just had some major problems with them after they actually purchased the property?
Well, you and I know in real estate that once you buy it, you know, things change and happen. So I'm very much familiar with that. But we're talking about human capital here, and it's very stressful just to think about people living in those kind of conditions. I grew up poor, so I understand leaking roofs and all that kind of stuff. So it's very uncomfortable. So this makes me very uncomfortable that we have this right here in the capital city, in the heart of the city, and people living in these conditions.
Thank you, Director Wright. Director Webb?
Thank you. Different subject.
Okay.
Last week, we reported that the Single-Use Plastic Bag Committee had started to meet, and I wanted all the board members to be aware that the survey that we have for businesses and residents is online. It's gone out. There were about 600 responses, I think, in the first few hours. And if the directors would make their neighborhood associations aware of it or help promote it on social media, it would be helpful. It will be out until after the first of the year.
I've seen the survey on Nextdoor for sure. Yeah. So that was communicated from Lamar, I think. So, and then we had the group out at Southwest first Monday of this month and talked to us about the survey. So I think we're kind of covered in Southwest, but we'll make sure we get that information out.
It's very short, and a good response would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Webb. Director Adcock?
Moore, would you also give the board a update on the Heritage House Hotel on South University? The new owner has taken over and they've started painting it a different color, but I'd like to know what they're doing for the inside of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adcock. Okay, seeing no more questions, I think we're done. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you next Tuesday. We are adjourned.